The council chamber had never felt so empty, though every seat was filled except one. Director Kalen of the Vex Collective stared at the vacant spot where humanity's representative always sat. 3 months had passed since Ambassador Tyler Reed submitted Earth's formal withdrawal from the Galactic Council, but nobody really believed they'd go through with it. "The humans are actually leaving," Kalen announced, his voice carrying a mix of surprise and satisfaction. His tentacles curled in what passed for a smile among his species. Their final transport departed an hour ago. No more humans in council space. High Chancellor Vross of the Thrain Empire let out a harsh clicking laugh. The sound echoed off the chamber's crystal walls. "About time. They never belonged here anyway. Always complaining about our methods, questioning our decisions, making everything more complicated than it needed to be." Around the massive circular chamber, representatives from 30 different species murmured in agreement. Some nodded their heads, others gestured with appendages that humans never quite understood. The general mood was one of relief, like finally getting rid of a persistent headache. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Council for 200 years. 2 centuries of trying to fit into a system that never really wanted them. They proposed reforms that were ignored. They raised concerns that were dismissed. They offered innovations that were taken without credit. And through it all they stayed patient, kept trying, kept hoping things would improve. But patience has limits even for humans. Keeper Judith sat in the observation section, separated from the main council floor. She was one of the few humans who chose to stay behind, serving as a cultural observer. Her weathered face showed lines earned from decades of watching her people struggle for respect that never came. Now, as she watched the council celebrate humanity's departure, something cold settled in her chest. She stood up slowly, her joints aching. Age had caught up with her, but her mind remained sharp. "You're making a mistake," she called out, her voice cutting through the chatter. "My people don't retreat. We reposition." The chamber fell silent for a moment. Then Kalen waved a dismissive tentacle. "Your people run, Keeper. Back to their little corner of space where they belong. Earth and its colonies were always too small to matter anyway. We gave you fusion technology," Judith said quietly. "Medical advances that saved billions. Agricultural methods that ended famines on 17 worlds. And you treated us like servants. You were compensated fairly," Vross countered, though his eyes wouldn't meet hers. "The council always pays its debts." "You paid in scraps while taking treasures," Judith replied. She began walking toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. "There's a sealed package Ambassador Reed left in the archives. You should open it." Kalen snorted. "We'll get to it eventually. Right now we have more important matters to discuss. Like how to divide up all those nice colonies the humans abandoned. Those mining operations in Sector 7 alone are worth a fortune." The council erupted in excited chatter again. Species that had been rivals for centuries suddenly found common ground in carving up human territories. The Vex wanted the mining worlds. The Thrain claimed the agricultural planets. The Quinn Federation put in bids for the research stations. Nobody noticed Judith pause at the doorway. Nobody heard her whisper under her breath, "You never asked why we built so much, so fast, in places you told us weren't worth the effort." She left the chamber, and the council continued their celebration. They talked about increased profits and simplified decision-making. They joked about human stubbornness and emotional weakness. They congratulated themselves on finally being free of the species that never quite fit their perfect system. Deep in the council archives, 3 levels below the main chamber, a black container sat on a shelf. It had been placed there exactly 3 months ago, delivered by Ambassador Reed himself on humanity's last day as council members. The container was sealed with human technology, marked with bright red letters in several languages. The English version read, "Final warning, do not ignore." But the archives were managed by a junior Quinn administrator who couldn't read human languages. He'd filed the container away without logging its contents, assuming it was just another box of farewell documents or historical records. Nothing important. Nothing urgent. The container sat in darkness, waiting. Inside, a data chip held a message that would change everything. But for now, the council remained ignorant, comfortable in their assumptions about humanity's departure. They thought they'd won. They thought the difficult species had finally accepted defeat and gone home. They divided up human territories like vultures picking over a carcass, never once wondering why humanity would abandon 200 years of work without a fight. Keeper Judith returned to her small quarters near the observation wing. She packed her few belongings slowly, carefully. Within a week she'd be gone too, following her people back to human space. Back home. She looked at a photo of Ambassador Reed on her desk. They'd worked together for 40 years. She knew him better than most. Tyler Reed didn't give up. Tyler Reed didn't run. Tyler Reed planned. And if the Council knew what humanity had been preparing for the past decade, they'd be terrified instead of celebrating. But they'd learn soon enough. 3 months passed like a dream for the Galactic Council. Everything ran smoother than it had in decades. Council sessions that used to drag on for hours now finished in half the time. There were no more uncomfortable questions about resource distribution. No more proposals for worker rights that made the major powers squirm. No more humans pointing out the inconvenient truths everyone else preferred to ignore. Director Kalin stood at the center of the chamber, practically glowing with pride as he presented the quarterly economic report. His tentacles gestured enthusiastically at the holographic displays floating above the council floor. The former human mining operations in Sector 7 now belong to the Vex Collective. I'm pleased to announce that production has increased by 15% under our management. Applause rippled through the chamber. Not the polite, diplomatic clapping that usually followed announcements, but genuine enthusiasm. The Vex had taken over 12 mining colonies that humans had operated for nearly a century, and the profits were already showing. High Chancellor Vross rose from his seat, his massive frame casting shadows across the floor. The Thrain Empire has assumed control of the agricultural worlds humanity abandoned. 12 planets, all producing above previous quotas. Their harvests will feed our expanding fleets and growing populations for generations to come. More applause. Louder this time. The Thrain had seized some of the most fertile worlds in known space, planets that humans had spent decades terraforming and cultivating. Now those crops would fill Thrain warehouses instead of human ones. Junior Delegate Nexus from the Quinn Federation leaned toward his companion, not bothering to lower his voice much. Remember when Ambassador Reed kept warning us about taking on too much territory too fast? Kept saying something about overextension and supply lines. Turns out humans were just scared of real competition. Laughter spread through the nearby seats. Others joined in with their own stories about human caution and hesitation. How they always wanted to study things longer, plan more carefully, consider every possible outcome before acting. Now it all seemed like cowardice dressed up as wisdom. They talked so much about sustainable development, another delegate added, making air quotes with his claws. Turns out they just couldn't handle operating on a galactic scale. The mocking continued during breaks, in corridors, and private meetings. Humanity became the punchline to 1,000 jokes. The species that gave up prime real estate without a fight. The people who ran home crying when things got competitive. The weaklings who couldn't handle playing with the big powers. Even species that had been friendly with humans started distancing themselves from Earth's memory. Why associate with failure? Why defend a species that wasn't even around anymore? Better to laugh along, fit in, and maybe get a piece of the territories being divided up. But while the council celebrated, strange reports began trickling in from the frontier. Nothing alarming at first, just odd little inconsistencies that didn't quite make sense. Captain Lisa Grant, a human freighter pilot who'd chosen to stay in council space running cargo, docked at the Vex station in Sector 7. She'd been hauling supplies to these mining colonies for 20 years. Knew every station master by name, every docking bay by number. Except now everything felt wrong. Docking request denied, the automated voice informed her. This facility is restricted to Vex personnel only. Lisa frowned at her console. This is the Grant's Fortune requesting standard commercial docking. I've got a cargo manifest approved by your operations center. Negative. All human vessels are prohibited from approaching within 10,000 kilometers. Reverse course immediately. She tried 3 more stations. Same response at each one. The colonies that used to welcome her now treated her like a threat. More than that, the defensive platforms around each station had changed. New weapons arrays. Upgraded sensor nets. Technology she didn't recognize. When she reported this to the Council Trade Authority, they dismissed her concerns. The Vex are simply upgrading security. Nothing unusual about that. But Lisa had served in Earth's merchant fleet for 30 years. She knew defensive systems. And what she'd seen didn't look like standard upgrades. It looked like someone was preparing for war. Other reports came in from different sectors. Trading vessels reported being turned away from former human space. Not hostile but firm. Automated defense stations that used to allow passage now demanded ships turn back. Energy signatures detected along the old borders that didn't match any known Council technology. A Thrain scout ship ventured close to the new human boundary, trying to map the defensive network. They detected something massive moving in the darkness between stars. Something big enough to show on scanners from 1,000,000 kilometers away. When they tried to get closer, targeting locks activated from a dozen different sources simultaneously. The scout ship jumped away fast and the crew refused to go back. Nobody wanted to hear these stories. The council was too busy counting profits and celebrating their expanded territories. Warning signs were everywhere, but everyone was too comfortable to notice. In the council archives, the black container still sat untouched. Dust had begun to gather on its surface, making the red warning label harder to read. But the words remained clear enough for anyone who bothered to look. Final warning, do not ignore. Keeper Judith visited the archives once a week. She'd stand there for hours, sometimes just staring at that container. Other archivists thought she was going senile, mourning her people's departure by haunting the basement. But Judith wasn't mourning. She was counting down. She knew what was in that container. She'd helped Tyler Reed record the message inside. And she knew exactly what humanity was doing out there in the darkness beyond council space. Every week that passed, every day the council remained ignorant and arrogant. The situation grew more dangerous. She could have opened the container herself. Could have forced the council to listen. But that wasn't her responsibility anymore. Tyler had been clear about that. The council needed to face the consequences of their own choices. They needed to open that package themselves, to take responsibility for ignoring humanity's final warning. Until then, Judith would wait and watch as the most powerful alliance in the galaxy celebrated their victory, completely unaware that they hadn't won anything at all. They'd simply been allowed to believe they had, while humanity prepared something none of them could imagine. The comfortable arrogance would end soon enough. And when it did, the galaxy would learn what humanity really meant by repositioning. Admiral Cross of the Thrain Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the planet Verdana Prime grow larger on the view screen. 20 warships accompanied him, the pride of the Thrain fleet. More than enough firepower to secure one agricultural world against any possible resistance. This is going to be the easiest assignment of my career, he told his first officer. The humans abandoned this place 3 months ago. We just fly in, plant our flag, and start managing the harvests. His first officer nodded, but something about her expression suggested concern. Sir, I'm getting strange readings from the planet. The atmospheric composition is off. Cross waved a dismissive hand. Probably just equipment malfunction. These sensors have been acting up since we left port. Make a note for the maintenance crew. But as they approached closer, even Cross couldn't ignore what the screens were showing. Verdana Prime had been one of humanity's crown jewels, a world transformed from barren rock into fertile paradise over 80 years of careful terraforming. Endless fields of golden grain, forests planted in precise patterns, rivers redirected to irrigation systems that fed an entire sector. Now those fields were brown and dying. The forest looked like skeletal hands reaching toward a sky that seemed darker than it should be. Sir, oxygen levels in the atmosphere are dropping, the science officer reported, his voice tight with confusion. Nitrogen increasing. It's like someone's running the terraforming process backwards. Cross leaned forward in his command chair. On the surface he could see massive machines, bigger than skyscrapers, pumping something into the air. Humanity had left those machines behind, but they weren't supposed to be running. They were supposed to be shut down, waiting for new operators. What are those things doing? He muttered. They're stripping the atmosphere, the science officer said, disbelief coloring his words. Removing the oxygen, breaking down the greenhouse balance, destabilizing the entire ecosystem. In 6 months, this planet will be uninhabitable again. But why would they do that? The first officer asked. They spent decades making this world livable. Why destroy their own work? Cross never got to answer. Every alarm on the bridge screamed at once. Multiple contacts, the tactical officer shouted. Defense platforms activating all around the planet. Sir, they weren't on any of our scans. The view screen lit up with dozens of weapons platforms, appearing as if from nowhere. They'd been there all along, Cross realized, hidden by stealth technology that made council sensors useless. Technology that humanity supposedly didn't have, according to every intelligence report he'd ever read. The first volley hit 3 Thrain destroyers before anyone could react. Not warning shots. Not disabling fire. Full power strikes that punched through military-grade shields like they weren't even there. Shields up. Return fire. Cross ordered, gripping his chair as the flagship shuddered from a near miss. His fleet responded, years of training taking over. Energy weapons and kinetic rounds filled the space around Verdana Prime. But the human defense platforms moved with impossible precision, dodging shots that should have connected, absorbing hits that should have destroyed them. And their return fire was devastating. Cross watched in horror as another destroyer simply came apart, its hull shredded by weapons that cut through armor plating like it was tissue paper. A cruiser tried to break away, but targeting beams locked onto its engines and tore them to pieces. Where did they get this technology? His first officer screamed over the alarms. Our intelligence said humans were 50 years behind us in weapons development. Our intelligence was wrong, Cross said quietly, watching his fleet die around him. A communications officer looked up from her station, face pale. Sir, we're receiving reports from other sectors. The Vex mining operations in Sector 7 just went dark. Their entire fleet was engaged by automated defenses. Early estimates say 70% casualties. More reports flooded in as the battle continued. Human colonies across former territories were doing the same thing. Destroying themselves, tearing down everything they'd built, and attacking any council forces that tried to interfere. Not with overwhelming numbers, but with technology that shouldn't exist and precision that suggested years of planning. This isn't random, Cross realized. This is coordinated. They've been planning this since before they left the council. Another explosion rocked the flagship. The shields were failing, overloaded by sustained fire from weapons that his engineers couldn't even identify. Half his fleet was already gone, drifting debris or damaged hulks limping away from the battle. Retreat. Cross finally ordered, his pride shattered along with his fleet. All ships, emergency jump now. The surviving vessels scattered, jumping to faster than light speeds in random directions. Standard procedure when facing overwhelming force. Cross's flagship was among the last to leave, and as they jumped away, he caught one final glimpse of Verdana Prime. The planet was burning. Not from weapons fire, but from the systematic destruction of its own ecosystem. Humanity was erasing 80 years of work in a matter of weeks, ensuring that nobody else could benefit from what they'd built. Back at council headquarters, emergency sessions convened hourly. The massive central chamber that had been so full of celebration 3 months ago now buzzed with panic and confusion. This is impossible, Director Kalen insisted, his tentacles trembling. Humans don't have this kind of military capability. They were barely able to defend their own borders. Apparently they were holding back, someone else suggested. Or lying. Or we were so busy dismissing them that we never actually paid attention to what they were capable of. High Chancellor Vross slammed his appendage on the console, creating a boom that silenced the chamber. This is an act of war. The humans are destroying valuable territories and killing council personnel. We must respond with overwhelming force. With what force? Admiral Cross's voice came through the communication system, tired and defeated. I just lost 15 ships to automated defenses on one planet. The Vex lost an entire fleet at their mining operations. Every report says the same thing. Human weapons technology is decades ahead of anything in our databases. Then we were deceived, Vross growled. They pretended to be weak while building up secret arsenals. This is treachery of the highest order. In the back of the chamber, Keeper Judith finally stood. Her voice was quiet, but in the shocked silence, everyone heard her clearly. You still haven't opened the package. Every eye in the chamber turned toward her. The old human woman who'd been watching their celebrations, their arrogance, their comfortable dismissal of the species they'd pushed out. Ambassador Reed left a message, she continued. 3 months ago. In the archives. He told you exactly what would happen. But you were too busy dividing up our colonies to bother reading it. Director Kalen's tentacles curled tight. You knew about this? You knew they would attack. This isn't an attack, Judith corrected. This is a reclamation. And you were warned. She started walking toward the exit, her steps slow but steady. If you want to know what happens next, maybe you should finally open that container and listen to what humanity tried to tell you. She left the chamber in chaos, species shouting at each other, blaming everyone but themselves. The galaxy's comfortable order was burning, and they still didn't understand why. But they were about to learn. Keeper Judith walked through the council archives with steady purpose, the black container held carefully in both hands. Behind her, the entire Galactic Council had assembled, cramming into the narrow archive space because nobody wanted to miss this. 3 months of ignoring humanity's final message. 3 months of celebration and territorial grabs. Now, with human defensive fire still burning across a dozen sectors, they finally wanted to listen. The junior Quinn archivist who'd filed the container away stammered apologies. I didn't know it was important. There was no priority coding, no urgent markers in our system. The red warning label wasn't enough? Judith asked, though her tone held no anger. Just tired resignation. She tried to tell them. Ambassador Reed had tried for 200 years. But some lessons could only be learned through pain. She placed the container on the main archive table. Council members pressed closer, their various forms of breathing creating a strange symphony in the confined space. Director Kalen's tentacles twitched nervously. High Chancellor Vrasa's massive frame blocked the light from 3 smaller delegates behind him. Judith broke the seal with a simple press of her thumb. Human biometric security, designed to open only for authorized personnel. The container hummed, and a holographic projector rose from its center. Ambassador Tyler Reed appeared above the table, life-sized and solid-looking. Even as a recording, his presence commanded attention. He wore the formal diplomatic uniform of Earth's Council delegation, but something in his eyes suggested this wasn't a typical farewell message. To the Galactic Council, Reed began, his voice calm and measured. If you're watching this, you've finally noticed what we've been doing. That took longer than I expected, honestly. I gave you 2 weeks before curiosity would win. Took you 3 months. A few delegates shifted uncomfortably. The recording somehow felt accusatory, even though Reed's tone remained neutral. For 200 years, humanity tried to be part of your alliance. We came to the Council with hope, believing we'd found partners among the stars. Species we could learn from, grow with, build a better galaxy alongside. We offered everything we had. Our technology, our resources, our innovations. We asked for nothing in return except respect and fair treatment. Reed paused, and for a moment something harder flashed across his features. We didn't get it. Not once in 2 centuries. Director Kalen started to speak, but Keeper Judith held up a hand. Let him finish. You owe him that much. The hologram continued, Reed pacing slowly as he spoke. Every technological breakthrough we shared with you was taken and credited to Council research divisions. Every resource agreement we signed somehow favored everyone except humanity. Every proposal we made to improve worker conditions or environmental protections was dismissed as naive idealism. We weren't naive, Reed said, stopping his pacing to stare directly at where the viewers would be standing. We watched. We learned. We saw how the Council really operates. How the strong take from the weak, how innovation is stolen rather than traded, how promises mean nothing when power is involved. High Chancellor Vras made a rumbling sound deep in his chest. This is slander. We paid fair prices for human technology. You paid in scraps, the recording continued, as if Reed had anticipated this exact objection. A fusion reactor design worth trillions? You gave us mining rights to an asteroid field you were going to abandon anyway. Medical advances that saved billions of lives across the galaxy? You granted us 3 agricultural worlds and systems too far from your core territories to matter. The hologram displayed data streams, economic analyses, trade agreements. Numbers that painted a devastating picture of systematic exploitation. For every innovation humanity provided, they received compensation worth maybe 5% of its actual value. We protested, Reed said. Filed official complaints. Requested arbitration. You know what happened? Our complaints were lost in bureaucratic review. Our requests for arbitration were delayed for decades. And when we pushed too hard, you threatened to revoke our council membership entirely. Several delegates looked away from the hologram. Others found sudden interest in their data pads. Nobody wanted to meet Keeper Judith's eyes. So we learned another lesson, Reed continued. One that Earth taught us long ago, written in blood across centuries of human history. Appeasement doesn't work. Patience without power is just another word for weakness. And if you want to be treated as equals, you have to be willing to walk away. The hologram changed, showing star maps. Human colonies spread across former council space, each one marked with detailed information. What you're seeing now is not an attack. It's a reclamation. Every world we're scorching we built from nothing. Every station we're dismantling, we constructed with human labor and resources. Every defensive platform destroying your fleets, we placed there over the last decade while you were too arrogant to notice. A decade? Someone whispered. They've been planning this for 10 years? Longer, Judith said quietly. Ambassador Reed started the withdrawal strategy 15 years ago. Getting approval from Earth took time. Building the defenses in secret took longer. But we're patient when we need to be. Reed's hologram gestured to the star maps. We're removing everything we contributed to council space. Every innovation, every technology, every strategic advantage we gave you. Not because we want to hurt you, but because we refuse to subsidize our own exploitation any longer. The hologram zoomed in on specific territories, showing timelines and evacuation schedules. You have 2 weeks from the moment you open this message. 2 weeks to remove all council personnel from former human territories. After that, our reclamation process enters its final phase, and we will not be responsible for anyone who chooses to remain. This is extortion. Vross roared at the recording. This is consequences, Reed replied, his tone still maddeningly calm. For 200 years, you treated us like servants. Useful only for what you could take. You assumed our patience meant we were weak. Our willingness to compromise meant we were pushovers. Our hope for genuine partnership meant we were fools. The hologram of Reed stopped, standing at attention like a soldier delivering a final report. We're not fools. We're humans. We built civilizations from nothing on a world that tried to kill us for millions of years. We turned deserts into gardens, barren rock into paradise. We survived ice ages and plagues and wars that should have destroyed us. And we did it all without anyone's help. You had the chance to be our partners, Reed continued, and now his voice carried an edge of genuine regret. Imagine what we could have built together. What discoveries we might have made, what problems we could have solved, if you'd treated us as equals instead of resources to be exploited. The hologram began to fade, but Reed's final words echoed through the archive. We're leaving. Taking everything we built, everything we contributed, everything you took for granted. And we're establishing new borders that you will respect, or face consequences that will make the last 3 months look like a warning shot. Don't follow us. Don't test us. And don't ever mistake our restraint for weakness again. The hologram vanished completely. The archive fell silent except for the sound of various species breathing, some fast with anger, others slow with shock. Keeper Judith carefully closed the container. He recorded that message the day before we withdrew from the council. Every word was true then. It's still true now. You had 3 months to hear this warning. 3 months to understand what you'd done. Instead, you celebrated and divided up our colonies like we were a defeated enemy. She looked around at the assembled council members, meeting as many eyes as she could. Humanity doesn't retreat. We reposition. We gave you 200 years to be our partners. Now you get to learn what it means when we decide you're not. She walked out of the archives, leaving the council in stunned silence, finally understanding the magnitude of their mistake. High Chancellor Vross refused to accept what the recording had told them. Within hours of watching Ambassador Reed's message, he was already planning his response. Pride wouldn't let him admit defeat. Power wouldn't let him accept being dictated to by a species he'd spent 2 centuries dismissing as inferior. He stood before the emergency council session, his massive frame radiating determination. We cannot allow this insult to stand. The humans have destroyed council property, killed our personnel, and threatened our sovereignty. If we back down now, every minor species in the galaxy will think they can challenge us. Director Kalen's tentacles curled in agreement, though some of them trembled slightly. The Vex Collective stands with the Thrain Empire. We've already lost too much to simply surrender. Our mining operations, our investments, our pride. All of it burned by human treachery. This isn't treachery, someone from the back argued. A delegate from one of the smaller species that had always been friendly with humanity. They warned us. We chose not to listen. They attacked us. Vross roared. That's all that matters. We respond with overwhelming force or we look weak to the entire galaxy. Within 3 days, the largest military fleet in Council history assembled at the edge of human space. 5,000 warships, drawn from the Thrain Empire and Vex Collective, along with contributions from a dozen other species who feared what humanity's defiance might inspire in their own territories. Admiral Cross stood on the bridge of a new flagship, his previous ship still being repaired from the Verdana Prime disaster. He'd argued against this action, warned that human capabilities were being underestimated again. But orders were orders and the Council demanded a show of force. All ships report ready, his tactical officer announced. We await your command, sir. Cross looked at the star maps showing human space. New borders, triple the size of their old territory, all claimed in the 3 months since they'd withdrawn from the Council. Claimed and apparently fortified, if the intelligence reports were accurate. Send the demand for surrender, Cross ordered, though his stomach churned with doubt. Give them one chance to back down peacefully. The response came within minutes. Not from Ambassador Reed or any official channel. Just a simple text message broadcast to every ship in the fleet. You were warned. Last chance to turn back. Vross, monitoring from Council headquarters, ordered the attack. Show them what happens when you challenge the Galactic Order. Advance on all fronts. The fleet moved forward, crossing into what humanity now claimed as their territory. For the first few minutes nothing happened. Sensors showed empty space, a few distant colonies, standard defensive platforms that looked manageable. Then everything changed at once. Human ships appeared from nowhere, dropping out of some kind of stealth that made them invisible until they wanted to be seen. But these weren't the old human designs from Council databases. These were something new, sleek and dangerous looking, covered in weapons that tactical officers couldn't identify. Captain David Chin commanded one of the human frigates, part of a defensive wing protecting the colony of New Terra. He'd been born on that world, grown up watching his parents terraform barren land into farmable soil. The Council thought they could just take it because humans had left? Not happening. All wings execute pattern Delta, he ordered. His crew moved with precision, practicing for this exact scenario for 5 years. Target their command vessels first. Communications relays second. Make them blind and leaderless. The human fleet didn't fight like the Council expected. There was no honorable exchange of volleys, no formation-based combat where superior numbers would eventually win. Human ships moved like predators, striking at vulnerable points and disappearing before return fire could connect. A Thrain command carrier, flagship of their third battle group, suddenly found itself under attack from 12 different angles. Human weapons, using technology that shouldn't exist, tore through its shields in seconds. The carrier didn't explode dramatically. It just went dark, power systems destroyed, life support failing, drifting helplessly while its escort ships scrambled to respond. But the escorts had their own problems. Human ships targeted propulsion systems, leaving enemy vessels stranded. They hit communication arrays, preventing coordination. They struck supply vessels, cutting off ammunition and fuel to the combat ships. And then the real nightmare began. Deep in Council space, far behind the battle lines, human strike teams hit critical infrastructure. Not civilian targets, nothing that would violate the rules of war. But military shipyards, command centers, supply depots, all the things that made the Council's war machine function. The Thrain Empire's primary construction facility, where they built their massive warships, went offline in a cascade of precision strikes. Vex communication relays that coordinated their entire fleet network were destroyed by weapons fired from ships nobody had seen coming. Admiral Cross watched his tactical display in horror as red warnings spread across the map. They're not just fighting us here. They're hitting everything. How do they have ships in our core territories? We would have detected them jumping in. His tactical officer looked up, face pale. Sir, intelligence is reporting that human vessels have been in Council space for years. Hidden in asteroid fields, lurking in dead systems, waiting. They've been positioning assets since before they withdrew from the Council. Years? Cross whispered. This wasn't a response to being pushed out. This was always the plan. The battle lasted 6 hours total. Not because it was hard fought on both sides, but because that's how long it took for the Council fleet to realize they'd already lost and begin retreating. 5,000 ships had advanced into human space with confidence. Less than 3,000 limped back out, many of them damaged and powerless, being towed by whatever vessels still had working engines. The Thrain Empire had lost 60% of its military infrastructure. Not conquered, not occupied, just destroyed. The Vex Collective's shipyards were rubble. Communication networks that had taken decades to build were gone. And humanity hadn't invaded a single Council world. Hadn't occupied any territory. Hadn't demanded surrender or tribute. They'd simply demonstrated, with brutal efficiency, that the Council couldn't win a war against them. Then the human forces withdrew. Pulled back behind their new borders like nothing had happened. Like they'd just swatted away an annoying insect and returned to more important business. Ambassador Tyler Reed appeared on every Council communication channel simultaneously. His message was brief and direct. We don't want your territory. We don't want to rule you. We want to be left alone to build our own future without interference or exploitation. You have a choice now, Reed continued, his expression neutral but his words carrying weight. Accept us as equals. Real equals, not the pretend partnership we had before. Trade with us on fair terms or don't trade at all. Diplomatic relations based on mutual respect, or no relations whatsoever. The borders we've claimed are non-negotiable. The technologies we've removed from Council space will not be returned. Everything starts fresh from this point, and this time humanity sets the terms for our own participation. Reed leaned forward slightly and his voice dropped lower. We didn't want this. We hoped for 200 years that you'd eventually see us as partners. But you taught us that hope without strength is just weakness with better marketing. So we built strength. And now you'll respect that strength, or you'll stay on your side of the border and leave us alone. Your choice. The transmission ended. The council chamber erupted in chaos like nothing in its 1,000-year history. Species that had been allies turned on each other, blaming everyone else for the disaster. The Thrain Empire and Vex Collective were too damaged to continue fighting even if they wanted to. Smaller species saw opportunity in the power vacuum, old rivalries surfacing now that the dominant powers were weakened. Keeper Judith stood in the observation section, watching the collapse of the order that had seemed so permanent just months ago. She felt no satisfaction in being right, no pleasure in watching the council tear itself apart. Just sadness for what could have been if they'd chosen partnership over exploitation. She gathered her belongings and headed for the transport that would take her home to human space. As she walked through the corridors one last time, she passed delegates arguing, species threatening each other, the entire political structure unraveling. One young delegate, barely old enough for his position, stopped her. "Keeper Judith, what happens now? How do we fix this?" She looked at him with tired eyes. "You start by learning the lesson humanity tried to teach you for 200 years. Respect isn't given because someone is weak enough to need your approval. It's earned by being strong enough to demand it. We tried the first way. You forced us to prove the second. Will humanity ever rejoin the council?" he asked quietly. Judith smiled sadly. "Maybe someday. When there's a council worth joining. When respect is real and partnership means something more than exploitation with better paperwork. Until then we'll be building our own future. And you'll have to decide what kind of galaxy you want without us holding your hand through every decision." She left him standing there and continued to her transport. Behind her, the Galactic Council faced a truth they'd refused to see for centuries. Humanity didn't need them. They'd needed humanity. And now they'd have to learn how to function in a galaxy where humans were no longer willing to be taken for granted. The galaxy's power structure hadn't been conquered by human ambition. It had collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance, brought down not by humanity's desire to rule, but by their refusal to be ruled ever again.